Clara Whitmore was supposed to be grieving, dressed in black, standing beside her sister at their mother's funeral. Instead, her car was found abandoned at a rest stop, her phone shattered, and her name would soon become the center of a baffling mystery. 9 months later, a woman calling herself Elise Harmon turned up in a small Georgia town, hiding in plain sight. What happened in those missing months would shock everyone who thought they knew her, and reveal that sometimes the truth is even stranger than vanishing without a trace. On a cold, gray March morning, Clara Whitmore stepped out of her modest apartment in Portland, Maine, for what was supposed to be a somber but straightforward drive. She was heading to her mother's funeral in Albany, New York, a trip that would take her just under 6 hours if the weather cooperated. Her car, a silver 2012 Honda Civic, was packed with a small overnight bag, a change of black clothes, and a single red rose she planned to place on the casket. She didn't tell many people she was coming. Only her younger sister Riley knew for sure, and even she hadn't heard from Clara since the night before. By 10 a.m., Clara had been on the road for about 2 hours, according to traffic cameras that caught her vehicle passing through New Hampshire. She appeared calm behind the wheel, driving at a steady pace. Then she vanished. Somewhere between that last camera and the Connecticut border, all trace of Clara disappeared. When she failed to arrive by mid-afternoon, her sister tried calling. The call went straight to voicemail. At first, everyone assumed she was delayed. Maybe traffic, maybe car trouble. But when darkness fell and there was still no sign of her, concern turned into alarm. The next day, local police were contacted. Within 48 hours, Clara's vehicle was discovered abandoned at a small, rarely used rest area just off Interstate 95 in a wooded section of southern Massachusetts. The scene was unsettling. The car was locked from the outside, yet her keys were still in the ignition. Her phone, found under the driver's seat, had a cracked screen and was powered off. Her wallet, containing her ID and bank cards, was on the passenger seat, untouched. The bag she packed was still in the trunk. Nothing appeared stolen or disturbed. The area was combed for clues. State police brought in tracking dogs and used drones to scan the thick forest surrounding the rest stop. But nothing turned up. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, no witnesses. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed Clara's car entering the rest area around 12:47 p.m. But no one was seen getting out. And the camera angle didn't catch the driver's side of the vehicle. What happened after that moment remained a mystery. Investigators considered the possibility of a random abduction. Perhaps she stopped to use the restroom and was grabbed. But there was no sign of blood, no broken glass, no drag marks in the dirt. Stranger abductions are rare, especially in broad daylight. Some wondered if Clara had staged her own disappearance. But why would she do that on the way to her own mother's funeral? The media picked up the story, framing it as a haunting and bizarre mystery. News stations aired images of her smiling face alongside clips of tearful family members pleading for her safe return. Her fiancé, Mark, was questioned and eventually cleared of any involvement. So were co-workers and friends. Everyone described her as quiet, kind, and dependable. She had no known enemies, no history of mental illness, no reason to vanish. Her social media accounts went dark. Her bank account sat untouched. Despite weeks of effort, no new leads emerged. A single shoe was found near a drainage ditch not far from where the car was discovered, but it didn't match Clara's size. Search parties made up of both volunteers and police combed the woods for days, finding nothing of value. As time passed, the case grew colder. Interest faded, the media moved on, and even her family, overwhelmed with grief and confusion, began to prepare for the worst. Clara Whitmore had disappeared into thin air. One moment she was a grieving daughter on a lonely highway. The next, She was gone, leaving behind a trail of questions, a silent phone, and a family broken in more ways than one. Weeks after Clara Whitmore's disappearance, desperation gave way to confusion, as police and family members tried to piece together a puzzle with no edges. The car, the phone, the bag, everything she left behind raised more questions than answers. If she had been abducted, why was nothing taken? If she had run away, why leave behind her money and belongings? In the early stages of the investigation, tips began to trickle in from across the Northeast, each one offering a new thread of hope, but none strong enough to pull the case forward. One truck driver called in from Pennsylvania, claiming he had picked up a woman hitchhiking near Scranton about a week after Clara disappeared. He remembered her because she had seemed nervous, kept glancing behind them, and refused to give a real name. She got out 2 towns over without saying a word. The description was vague: brown hair, blue eyes, black jacket, but it was close enough for detectives to investigate. They checked surveillance footage at nearby gas stations and diners, interviewed staff, and searched the area. Nothing came of it. 2 weeks later, a waitress in Virginia reached out to say she had served a woman who looked like Clara. She said the woman came in alone, sat in a corner booth, and barely touched her food. She seemed jumpy, her eyes constantly scanning the restaurant. When approached, she mumbled that she wasn't feeling well and left quickly, paying in cash. Again, the tip was pursued. Again, it led nowhere. Back in Maine, detectives turned their attention to Clara's digital footprint. Her social media accounts were inactive. There were no emails, no text messages after the day she vanished. Her bank account remained untouched, and no new credit cards had been opened. Then they found something strange: a single withdrawal of $400 made the night before she left. She had taken it from an ATM close to her apartment. It was an odd amount. Not enough to suggest a long-term escape plan, but too much for just a day trip. The lead was puzzling. If she had been planning to disappear, why not take more money? Why leave her wallet behind? The ATM camera confirmed it was her who made the withdrawal, alone, wearing a black hoodie and jeans. No one else was with her. The footage was clear, but her expression was not. She didn't look panicked. She looked determined. Investigators began to question everything they thought they knew. Could Clara have staged her own disappearance? If so, why? She had no history of instability. She had a stable job, a close relationship with her sister, and a fiancé who appeared genuinely heartbroken. But even in the most seemingly ordinary lives, there are hidden corners no one sees. Clara's family pushed back against the theory that she had run. Her sister Riley said Clara would never abandon them, not on the day of their mother's funeral. Still, detectives kept digging, now with a different lens. They started combing through Clara's past, looking for anything out of place: old debts, toxic friendships, former relationships. Everything came up clean. Then, one officer brought up a question that hadn't been seriously explored. What if Clara had a reason to be afraid? If she was running, maybe it wasn't from her life but from something or someone within it. With no solid answers and only fragments of possibilities, the case remained in limbo. Friends organized candlelight vigils, missing persons posters faded on telephone poles, and the map on the detective's wall, once filled with pins and string, stayed unchanged for weeks. The story of Clara Whitmore became less about what happened and more about what didn't. No ransom calls, no sightings confirmed, no messages sent in secret. Just a long stretch of silence, broken only by the occasional rumor, false hope, and the haunting question: if Clara was still out there, why hadn't she reached out? The truth, still hidden, was waiting in places no one had thought to look. 3 months after Clara Whitmore disappeared, her case had nearly fallen off the public radar. Despite media coverage in the early weeks, nothing concrete had been discovered, and newer headlines had taken over. But in a quiet conference room inside the Portland Police Department, a small team of detectives remained committed. One of them, a forensic analyst named Erica Simmons, decided to take another look at Clara's damaged phone. The initial search hadn't revealed much, but Erica believed something had been missed. She was right. Buried deep in the phone's memory were fragments of recently deleted messages. Most were ordinary, reminders, messages to friends, and short conversations with co-workers. But then there was a string of texts from an unsaved number. The texts were short, almost cryptic, and they stood out immediately. The most disturbing one read, "It's time. I'm finally doing it. No turning back." Others included phrases like, "I need a clean break," and "I'll be gone before they know." The phone number belonged to a prepaid burner, untraceable. Whoever Clara had been texting clearly didn't want to be found. Investigators couldn't determine who the other person was, but the tone of the messages shifted their focus. The theory that Clara had been abducted now had serious competition. Clara may have planned to vanish. Detectives began revisiting her past with renewed urgency. They looked into her school years, her employment history, and anything that could explain why she might flee. Then they found something unusual buried in sealed court documents from over a decade earlier. At age 17, Clara had served as a key witness in a federal case involving a wealthy businessman named Alan Decker, who had been arrested for running an underground financial crime ring. Clara had worked a summer job as a receptionist in one of his satellite offices and had come forward after overhearing threatening conversations and seeing falsified documents. Her testimony had played a major role in his conviction. During the trial, Decker had reportedly made veiled threats, hinting that those who betrayed him would regret it someday. Though he was sentenced to 10 years, he was released early for good behavior, just 2 weeks before Clara vanished. No one in Clara's adult life seemed to know about her connection to the trial, not her co-workers, not her fiancé, and not even her closest friends. Her sister Riley remembered the trial vaguely, but said Clara had refused to talk about it once it was over. Their family had tried to put it behind them, believing the danger had passed. This revelation cast Clara's disappearance in a new light. The burner phone, the ATM withdrawal, the strange messages. Everything began to fit together under the shadow of a long-buried fear. It was possible that Clara believed someone was coming after her. Whether that fear was based on fact or imagination didn't matter. The fear itself was powerful enough to make her act. Detectives reached out to federal authorities and attempted to locate Alan Decker. He had moved to a remote property in Arizona and denied any knowledge of Clara's disappearance. He claimed he had changed and wanted no contact with anyone from his past. Legally, there was nothing tying him to Clara now, but the timing of his release and her vanishing was hard to ignore. For the first time, there was a motive. Clara had a reason to want to disappear, whether she had been chased or was simply haunted by a ghost from her past. Still, there were gaps. Why not go to the police if she felt threatened? Why stay silent for so long? What was her endgame? These were questions no one could answer yet. But the theory was no longer about a woman taken against her will. Now, it was about a woman running from something only she could see, and the fear that maybe she had run straight into danger anyway. 9 months after Clara Whitmore vanished without a trace, a routine traffic stop nearly 1,000 miles away cracked the case wide open. In the small, quiet town of Ellijay, Georgia, a local sheriff's deputy pulled over a dusty blue pickup truck for a broken taillight. The woman behind the wheel handed over a Georgia driver's license identifying her as Elise Harmon. She looked calm, composed, and entirely unremarkable. But when the deputy ran her information, something didn't match. The social security number tied to her identity belonged to a woman who had died 2 years earlier in Florida. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Elise Harmon was taken in for questioning, and as investigators dug into her background, they found a blank slate. No birth certificate, no medical history, no digital trail. She had no verified job records, no tax filings, and had been renting a cabin in the hills for cash. She worked off the books at a local orchard, picking apples during the fall and taking odd cleaning jobs when the season ended. To her neighbors, she was polite but distant, never staying long in conversation, and always turning down invitations. She lived quietly, paid in cash, and kept mostly to herself. Fingerprints taken during her booking were eventually sent through a national database. When the results came back, they stunned the local authorities. Elise Harmon wasn't Elise at all. She was Clara Whitmore, the woman who had disappeared 9 months earlier under mysterious circumstances. News of the discovery reached Maine authorities quickly, and within days detectives flew to Georgia to meet her in person. Clara initially refused to speak. She sat silently during the first interviews, staring at the table in front of her. But eventually, the weight of 9 months in hiding broke her down. She began to talk, not in a frantic confession but in a slow, measured account of what had happened and why she had done it. She told them she had seen a man outside her apartment building just days before her mother's funeral. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak. But she recognized him. He had sat in the courtroom years ago during Alan Decker's trial, always in the back row, always watching. Clara didn't know his name, but the memory of his face was clear and terrifying. She became convinced he had found her and that it wasn't a coincidence he was there so soon after Decker's release. The fear that gripped her was immediate and overwhelming. She felt exposed, unprotected. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. Rather than alert the police, Clara made a decision that changed everything. She withdrew what little cash she could, packed a bag and drove away, first south, then west, stopping only to sleep and refuel. She left her car at a rest stop in Massachusetts to throw off any search patterns and hitchhiked the rest of the way, eventually ending up in Georgia. Along the way, she bought a fake ID and created the identity of Elise Harmon, using the birth certificate of a woman she found online who had died young and had never received a social security number. She admitted she had considered reaching out to her sister or her fiancé many times, but the risk felt too great. She feared that if anyone knew where she was, her past would find her again. She didn't expect to be found. She had accepted a life of isolation as the price for survival. Authorities reviewed her statements carefully. There was no evidence that the man she described had done anything criminal, and no indication that anyone had actively pursued her. But they also couldn't deny the trauma Clara had carried for over a decade. Her disappearance had not been driven by delusion, but by a deeply rooted fear shaped by a dangerous period in her life. Despite using a false identity, Clara was not charged with any crimes. Law enforcement deemed her a low-risk case and chose not to pursue legal action. Instead, arrangements were made to notify her family that she was alive, something they had all but stopped hoping for. Clara's story, once a terrifying mystery, was slowly unraveling into something far more complicated and human. The revelation that Clara Whitmore had been alive all along sent shockwaves through everyone connected to her story. In Maine, her family's grief turned to stunned disbelief. Her sister Riley broke down when she heard the news, torn between relief and sorrow, joy and betrayal. Her fiancé Mark reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour after police told him. For 9 months, they had mourned her, prayed for her, and lived in the uncertainty of not knowing. Now the truth had arrived, but it came wrapped in confusion and unanswered questions. The media reignited the story, this time with a completely different tone. Woman found alive. 9 months after vanishing became a national headline. News anchors debated whether Clara was a victim or a runaway. Online forums lit up with speculation. Some people sympathized with her fear, pointing to her past, and the trauma of testifying in a criminal case at just 17. Others were far less forgiving, accusing her of being selfish and reckless for abandoning her family and letting them believe she might be dead. Clara, however, stayed silent after her initial interview with police. She refused all media requests and declined to speak at any public events. Her lawyer released a short statement on her behalf, explaining that she had acted out of genuine fear for her safety and that she regretted the pain her disappearance had caused. But she would not be offering interviews, appearances, or further details. In the weeks that followed, she was slowly reunited with her family. The first meeting with Riley took place in a private setting, away from cameras and reporters. It was emotional, complicated, and filled with hard conversations. Trust had been fractured, and though love remained, it would take time to rebuild the bond they once shared. Clara was open about what had driven her to run, how she felt haunted, how she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, and how every shadow on the sidewalk felt like a warning. Despite the passage of time and the distance between fear and fact, Clara remained convinced she had done the only thing she could to protect herself. Whether the man she saw outside her apartment had truly meant her harm would never be proven. No evidence was ever found to support the theory that someone had been following her. The man she recognized from the courtroom could not be identified or located. But for Clara, the fear had been real enough to act on, and that fear had shaped her life more than any physical threat ever had. After a series of quiet meetings with law enforcement and mental health professionals, Clara made the decision not to return to her old life. Portland, her bookstore job, her apartment, all of it felt like a world that belonged to someone else. Instead, she chose to move to a small town in the Midwest under her real name. She found work at a nonprofit organization that helped women in crisis, using her story, not publicly but personally, as a way to connect with those who felt cornered by fear. Her fiancé, Mark, chose not to resume their relationship. The damage done by her disappearance had cut too deep. Though they parted on respectful terms, they would never go back to what they were before. Riley visited often, and over time, the sisters began to heal, building a new relationship based on honesty rather than silence. Clara's case remained a rarity in the world of true crime, a missing person found alive, unharmed, and changed forever. There were no arrests, no courtroom drama, no final showdown. Just a quiet return, a haunting past, and the long road to rebuilding a life once thought lost. Her story became a reminder that not every disappearance is a crime, and not every return comes with a happy ending. Sometimes survival looks like escape, and sometimes escape is the only choice a person believes they have.